Omakase. The life and words of author M. Kieran. If this is our first time meeting each other, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Max. I write books for a living. Following up on our conversations about Halloween, seeing as how the month of Halloween is about to wrap up, I wanted to share two quick little stories. My lovely spouse reminded me of this and how terrible I am, so I figured I would share. The last time I was giving out candy, I remember that I got a pair of kids at my door, and the first one that knocked, or when I opened the door, the first one that I saw was this young boy, clearly dressed in a green tunic with a green cap, holding a shield and a sword. He was very clearly supposed to be the character Link from the series of games The Legend of Zelda. Of course, unfortunately, since that game is titled The Legend of Zelda, it's become a bit of an online joke, or just pop culture joke, to think that the main character is named Zelda, in spite of him being named Link. And who I assume was his sister was clearly dressed up as Katniss Everdeen. And me being the horrible person that I am, I looked at the young man and I said, "Oh man, I love Zelda." And the sister found it funny, but he clearly did not. He just groaned and went, "No, his name is Link." By the way, my pronouns are they, them, and in case you're wondering, I felt really bad about this afterwards. Not about the boy, but about the girl, because I realized I missed a great chance to make another groaner of a joke. Because it should have been like, "Oh my god, I love Zelda. Oh, and it's that girl from the Divergent movies." That would have really made her roll her eyes. I am certain of it. She was clearly dressed as Katniss Everdeen. And I'm like, "Oh my god, I love the Divergent books." I actually don't. I've never read them. I don't know what they're like. But, and welcome to episode 19, the Halloween edition. The whole month's been Halloween of my writing advice and inspiration podcast. Today, I have a very special episode for you. In the first segment, I'm going to be talking about my week, what I've been doing, mostly transcribing a novel, and I will be talking about a particular game that I finished recently. It's a story-heavy game, so don't tune out. In the second segment, I'm going to be going over viewer questions. The theme today is questions for people who are starting out. I do realize that, in part because I've been doing this for so long, that I haven't been focusing a lot on people who are starting out. And thanks to an experience I had earlier this week, I kind of realized that it's not a bad idea to go back to the basics for a couple of weeks. I hope you guys don't mind. In the third and final segment, we're going to be having a prompt. I have an interesting exercise about deconstructing the things we like, so tune in for that. Before we go anywhere, though, 2 items of housekeeping, the same ones I always give you. The song that you're listening to at the end and at the beginning of the show, I said that backwards, don't worry about it, is Dreams of Green, or Dream of Green. I get it wrong every other episode, it's fine. Dream of Green by the OC Jazz Collective. Link in the description below, as well as links to a bunch of other cool places there. And now, with all of that stuff out of the way, let's begin with a conversation about my week. As you may know, if you have been catching up with the episodes week to week, I recently finished editing a novel. And, of course, because the universe likes to work in mysterious ways, mysterious asterisks, and very ineffective, I was mailing out copies of the manuscript. Like, I actually formatted them into an actual book, 8.5 by 11 inches, like with a lot of margin space for my beta readers. And for some reason, the printing company decided to print them in the reverse order that I ordered them, for reasons beyond my understanding. So I am finally getting literally 20 minutes before I hit record I finally got my copy of it, or rather, Kitty's copy of it. Yes, I am terrified, but the book's printed. A few of them, 2/3 of my beta readers, are already reading through it. None of them have messaged me anything along the lines of like, Max, I trusted you. Max, our friendship is through. Max, I think it's about time that we put an end to all this. So I'm staying positive. I haven't heard anything terrible, so I'm gonna assume that the story isn't absolute trash. I'm being really self-depreciating. But it's part of the process. So what have I been doing? Throughout this week, well, I had a small vacation because I had to take a rest eventually. I took a mini vacation, and when I came back, I began the I began the transcription of a novel that I began apparently in February of last year. Jesus. I didn't realize this, but I should give some background. Let me back up 2 steps. I wrote what is pretty much 80 to 90% of that novel. And because of personal life reasons, I ended up having to drop that story. And I realized that, or kind of my goal, my mission statement, my goal for the next year or so is to pick up all those novels that I started. In part because I just want to finish them and to finally get them out of my head. And also because it seems to me a little nonsensical to go and write another story when I have a book here and I'm literally padding the stack of 4 notebooks that I wrote it on. This novel here just needs 10% more words and it will be finished. And then I can actually, move on with the next parts of the process. So I've been working on that. The one thing I didn't realize is that A, I started writing the story in February of last year, and 2, is that I actually wrote like 15,000 words. I typed those 15,000 words. I don't know why after that I started writing it by hand. I think it must have been my anxiety getting really bad. But here I have in my hands, you can't see them because this is audio only. I have what is clearly 4 big notebooks. One of them is not written all the way, but it appears that I wrote for about 3 months because the last entry says 8th of May 2017. So this is a long story. In my notes, I know that I made mistakes because I remember when I was writing the story that at one point I was like, wait a second, is this chapter 25 or chapter 26? In my final count, looking over my notes, this story is 87 chapters before the conclusion of the climax and the end of the story and the epilogue. So this is a long story. The chapters are short. They're shorter than my usual chapters, but it's still 87 chapters. This story is probably going to hit 100 chapters. I feel inside of me, in my heart, in my rotten little heart, that it's probably going to hit 100 chapters. If anything, just because it feels geometrically right for it to have 100 chapters. So it's a long story. Probably like 400 pages, which is the longest story I've written to date. There is a story that I was writing earlier this year that is most likely, certainly going to surpass that. But that's life. And I really wanted to get back to this story. I've been talking about it on Twitter, and I will be referring to this story as HC until later. The reason why I am not calling this story by the name of the protagonist is because it's weird, and because it would only arise more confusion if I just told you the protagonist's name. So, HC. HC happens to be an acronym for the title of the book, but, we'll get there eventually. The one thing is that as I have been transcribing the story, because, I reread through those 15,000 words that I wrote, and then I began the transcription process. I'm actually not super worried about how long it's going to take me, because as soon as I finish the first notebook was my fancy Liechtenstein. Yeah, Yeah, that's how you pronounce that German word. Notebook. This was my fancy notebook with a lot of line space, and the rest of the notebooks are very wide. So I know that as soon as I finished my Liechtenstein notebook, everything else is gonna just fall through like this. I said this in a tweet, and I don't want to say this to sound like I'm very cool, because I'm not. But the writing in this is pretty solid. I'm actually not immediately rephrasing entire pages like I was with Alba. In the case of this story, I'm typing it up, and I know it's gonna require fixing. I don't want to give you the impression that because this writing is solid, that I'm not gonna edit any of that. I'm still gonna edit it. There is still lots of work here, as I'm about to describe in about 1.5 minutes. But overall, the writing is pretty solid. I'm actually kind of impressed with what Max from the past managed to write down, especially considering that they were dealing with really bad anxiety. The story's pretty well mechanically written, and that's actually pretty impressive. Regarding the problems looking forward, there's a couple of issues in this story that I can already feel are going to cause large amounts of revision. The first and the most obvious one is that the protagonist, the narrator, the person through whose eyes we see the story, is the most unlikable person you could possibly have. And her character, her beliefs, the way in which she sees the world, hint hint, it's not a very positive one, is very strong. It permeates through every single part of the fiction. And I know it gets better because you go from seeing her as this position of power to eventually realizing that she has basically walked herself into a corner, and that's really fun. The overall core of the story is very fun, and I know that once it gets going, once the reader notices the little twist to the story, the way in which the story kind of develops and becomes very fun, once they get to that, I know the reader is going to be along for the ride. So my goal in my head is to kind of examine the first, let's say, 50 pages of the writing and make sure that I don't lose the reader along the way. Because I am certain that once you get how the story is going to go, or you understand the flow of the story, you're going to tag along to find out what happens. I am certain of it, because that is exactly what kept me going. But yeah, other problems that I see in the narration is that this is a story with a lot of fantastical elements and a lot of things that are not part of our reality. And generally, in a story with fictional elements such as these, I would capitalize those things. If someone refers to that place as the something of something, I would capitalize that. The problem here is that there are so many things that are not part of our reality that if I were to capitalize them, it would be overwhelming. It would look as though every sentence has a capitalized term. The immediate change that I've already done in the manuscript is not capitalizing those things, in part because, and I know that I'm being vague here, but follow along with me. Thematically speaking, considering that the story is told from the point of view of someone who has experienced these things for millions upon millions upon millions of years, I believe that in her narration she would no longer capitalize those things because they would no longer be special to her. The exact same way that in regular language you stop capitalizing or underlining or highlighting new terms once they become common knowledge. Mechanically speaking, and thematically speaking, this change makes sense. She's so used to all these magical elements that to her they're not special. Why would they be capitalized? Why would, in her narration that she's clearly talking or outwardly stating to the reader, why would she capitalize these things? The only problem with this, the big problem, the kingpin, is that although it may make sense for the story, maybe it doesn't make sense for the reader. But ultimately, that's going to be something that I'm going to have to run by my beta readers, and I'll ask my wife, my lovely spouse, and I'll see what she thinks of it. Thematically and mechanically speaking, it makes sense, and it also makes the writing feel, how do I say this, more subtle, because I love that thing in stories where characters are talking about the things that are weird in their world as though they're normal because they're normal to them. So I want to capture that. But yeah, I'm going to keep transcribing. This story is going places, very dark places. This might be the darkest story that I've ever written, and I already know that people will not like this story. Some people will not like the story because it's so dark, but I think there's something really good here. And at the end of it all, I am having a lot of fun writing it. The characters are very fun. But now, let's change the subject for a moment. I have had a very emotional week for various reasons. Some of them are out of my hands. But the ones that were in my hands were my experience with 2 completed works of fiction. I'll be very brief on these, mostly because I'm still unpackaging my feelings about one of them. But this week, in between the last episode and this one, my lovely spouse and I finished watching season 3 of My Hero Academia, and literally last night, I finished playing through a visual novel game titled VA11 Hall A, known as Valhalla. Cyberpunk bartending action. It's a visual novel with a little mini game about mixing drinks, and instead of having dialogue choices, instead your impact into the story is based on how you mix drinks for certain patrons and recurring and friends that show up at the bar. But before I tackle that, just some really quick thoughts. I have been talking over the last few podcasts about My Hero Academia, an anime about American-style superheroes done with the backdrop of Japanese culture. And I'm going to say this very quickly. Episode 49 of that show has an amazing emotional culmination. A climax that had Kitty crying, and it had me on the verge of tears. The only reason why I was not crying was, and I remember vividly, I was holding back the tears because I knew that if I started crying 5 minutes in, I was going to be a mess by the end of the 23-minute episode. When I talk a lot about emotional payoff and characters being at the center of story, I mean situations like what happens on that episode. It's a long journey. The show is not perfect. It has issues. The plot really slows down after the first half of season 3. And I understand that because you had what might have... The story could have ended there. It could have ended on episode 50 and it would have been dramatically satisfying. And there's still issues here and there. But that show is one with character at the center of it, emotion at the center of it. And I said this before, and I know it sounds weird because, and I'll be honest with you, oh man, I hate having to bring up this point. Anime is not very good. Anime is often written with the goal of pandering, with the goal of fan service, and very seldom there's a lot of thought behind it. Even the stories that people hold up as the icons of the medium were not very well written. Oh no, here we go. Oh no, okay, give me 1 minute, I'll just get this off my chest. When Kitty and I watched one of the icons of the medium, Neon Genesis Evangelion, a mecha anime that people hold up as one of the most important parts of anime, I was slightly inspired by it, also troubled by it, and then when I realized that story had been written week to week, without any planning, without any forethought, all of the problems in that story suddenly came together, and I realized just how flimsily written that show had been. There had been no thought. There had been no mystery in between the things that were happening. It was a show written week to week, figuring out what you were doing on the fly, and that's not good writing. A lot of anime isn't well written. A lot of anime is made to pander to a particular subset of the people who consume it. My Hero Academia is not that. It isn't as bad. And it inspires me at times with its raw display of emotion and sadness and loss. And it inspired me then on episode 49 the same way that the first superhero movies inspired me, except that those never brought me to the verge of tears. Alright. I was going to talk about Valhalla, but now the time is up. Okay, Valhalla, very relaxed writing. It is very laid back. It touches some very heavy subjects, but overall the story is very laid back. I appreciate the tone. When you start up the game, literally a window comes up telling you, hey, make a drink, lean back. This is going to be a slow story, but that's fine. And I appreciate that. I didn't see that as an admission of the writing being weak. I noticed that as an admission of how the story was going to flow. And I actually really appreciated that. The slogan of that game is mix drinks and change lives. And that resonated with me very well. That game is also one focused entirely on character, though there are world-shattering events that happen throughout the story. They're all done through the lens of our main character, Jill. I really enjoyed the conversations with her. I enjoyed the moments where you realize that she's a fully developed character and not just a vehicle for the player. My only complaints with the game is that the very first two patrons that you get in the story might just be the worst people ever, so it's kind of a rough start. But there are regulars who show up at the bar, your friends, your boss, your co-workers, they're all very lovely characters. And now that the time is literally up for me, I'll just say my favorite character is Dorothy because she's funny and she enables this ridiculousness that happens at the bar. Okay, let's get out of here. Let's talk very quickly about the sponsors for this show. This show is brought to you by you, the lovely people who directly support me and what I do. If you enjoy the podcast, you can treat me to a cup of coffee in the description down below. Of course, you can also pledge to my Patreon page where you can get cool rewards like listen to this podcast early, vote on polls, have access to my monthly workshop a month before everyone else. You support me, I give you a little extra. Like, for instance, shoutouts. All of my patrons pledging $1 and up get a shoutout at the end of the episode. But a certain subset of my patrons who are being so generous get a shoutout right here. First off, I want to give a big shout out to Atalak. Atalak has a DeviantArt page. You can find out more about their writing and their art over at deviantart.com/AHTILAK. I also want to give a big shout out to Hero Song. Hero Song is writing LGBT positive novels. You can find them on smashwords.com. Do a quick search for Hero Song. And of course, a shout out to the rest of these lovely people. A. Howard, Elisa Dudley, Amelia, Angela, Brenda, Lishadra, Gilbert Gaudreau, Irina Phoenix, Lacey, Mark Maruska, Nicola, Pat Eichson, Polly Craftool, Soulmuse, and Synexia. And now, time for the questions. Every week, I take questions from my comments, from my Twitter, from my email, from my Tumblr, and I feature a couple of them on this show. If you have a question, shoot it my way. I am actually running out of questions at this moment, so literally I'm about to make a post on Twitter asking for questions, so this is a great chance for you to slide your question in. Any kind of range, any kind of topic, I'll cover it, okay? Okay. As I mentioned previously, the theme for this and probably the next episode will be on questions and answers for people who are getting started with writing. We're going to be moving into November, which is National Novel Writing Month. I talked about NaNoWriMo last week, and this week I'm going to talk more about the basics. I was having a conversation with someone on Twitter, and it kind of opened my eyes to something that I might have forgotten about, I'll be honest with you. I've been doing this for so long, and I went to college, I took creative writing courses, I worked in writing groups with people who were kind of in the same mental space that I was. And it would be a lie if I said that I have been in that mindset for a long while, and I haven't really thought about the very, very basics of writing. So having that conversation reminded me of something that I hadn't thought about in forever. And that was, how do you even begin to work out the thoughts for what you want to write about? How do you even come up with the scope for your story? How do you even find ideas? And first off, apologies, because I realized that I should have probably covered this way sooner, but it's not an excuse. But I've been doing this for so long that, like, I forget. I have forgotten my roots, but don't worry. We will go there together. I have made planning guides, I've made countless posts, and in my years of making prompts, I used to make prompts on Tumblr, I don't know if anybody remembers that, I ended up, and of course through my own experiences in college, I ended up finding my own way to begin with stories. As always, what you always hear on this podcast is my opinion, my advice, what works for me. And what I want to inspire you to do is to develop your own series of tools. The most important skill for a writer is critical thinking. To be able to look at things, analyze them, consider them, and assimilate them. I don't want you to use every tool that I give you, or every piece of advice that I give you, but I would like to hope that you consider them. And even if they are not perfect for you, take the values that work for you. I'm going to say this again, okay? Critical thinking is required to be a writer. Critical thinking is required to look at the world and ask, what if things were different? What if the world was different? What if this wasn't this way, but this other way? That element of imagination is rooted in critical thinking, in analyzing something and asking what if it wasn't this way. And not only that, but following that thought with questions. If this wasn't this way, then what way would it be? And how would that be affected? And that be affected? And that be affected? It is like building a spider web. And there's always these connecting points. A spider web is not just the line. It's a collection of lines, connected, intertwined. A story is not just a thread in a spider web. It is the web, and you, the spider. The first thing that I want you to keep in mind is to have an open mind. I know. In my own personal experience, when I first began writing stories, I remember that I focused a lot on what other people were doing. And I looked at what they were doing, and I asked myself how I could do that differently. Maybe a different Max back then thought how they could write things better. But ultimately, the sentiment was how to write those things differently. I didn't focus as much on concepts and values and ideas as much as I focused on how other people were doing things. And that's not inherently a bad thing, because ultimately I ended up at the right place. But what I want you to begin with first is to not look at stories as though molds, as though formulas. Don't think that just because the stories you have experienced up until now have, followed a formula, especially if you watch television, let's be real here, especially American television. And it's very easy to look at media and think, well, if that's the way a story is supposed to be, if I wish to make stories, they must be like those. And, of course, that's not true. Because a story can be whatever you want it to be. And this here already is already part of, analyzing and critically looking at storytelling. Just because the stories you have consumed up until this point have been one way, it doesn't mean that your stories have to be that way. You don't need to have the same structure. You don't need to have the same character roles in your story. And it's that realization, the forms that stories can take, that I found in my experience to have been a very liberating feeling. This realization that the stories that I had consumed, the games that I played, the books that I read, the movies that I had seen, they all hadn't been made as a council. Everyone had been writing stories differently. And me and the way that I did things was also valid. And for me to seek to find a way to tell stories was valid. So that became my goal. That became the way in which I approached my storytelling. To analyze not only the stories around me, but also the world around me. Ask questions. Think deeply. Analyze the world around you. Writers are very aware people. They look at things differently. They analyze things differently. What I say, that when you've been doing this long enough, you can flip over a rock and find a couple story ideas in there. What I mean by that is that we're so hyper-aware to the elements of a story, the little tidbits of inspiration that can push us, propel us through a novel, that we can find them anywhere. We look through the world, we find emotion, and we relate to it. We see sights, events, and people, and we see in them elements that can inspire us and inspire our stories. I also realize that looking at stuff like this can also be very overwhelming. And I get that. My recommendation to anyone who's looking to find where to even begin. I'm going to give you a recommendation. Not a rule, not a guideline. A recommendation. It is my delight in writing to follow characters. Character. People, their emotion, their fears, their goals, their dreams. That is my joy in fiction. To follow a person. To feel their emotion. If you're not sure where to begin right now, if you are just getting started, if you're inspired to tell your own stories, I am not sure what the best way is. But in my heart, what I feel when I think of this is that you should seek to look into the world and to find a point of view you wish to explore. It can be a point of view in a world different from ours. It can be a point of view in a profession you know nothing of. It can be a point of view in a person who suffered a struggle similar to yours, but different in every other aspect. Sometimes characters find us. Sometimes we have to go looking for them. But to me, my joy in writing is to find a point of view that inspires me, that makes me think and stay up at night and wonder what is going to happen next as I write it. The stack of stories that I'm working on, all of them began the exact same way. What would life be like from this point of view. I wonder what life is like for this person, in this other world, in this other place, in this other society and other time. There's a lot of stuff out there about stories, and a lot of it focuses on plot. Plot as the be-all, end-all to stories. And when I went to college, I had the joy of meeting a wonderful writing professor. And she inspired me, she filled me with hope, and I saw and I learned through her lessons what I've named now, what I've coined as the Golden Marcy Rule. And it is that character is not the byproduct of plot. Character development and character don't come because of points in an outline, but rather, plot is the byproduct. Events happen as a result of characters taking action, making choices, and facing the consequences of both. Characters doing things. Sometimes saving the world, sometimes trying to get up from the bed. Sometimes seeking revenge, sometimes picking up the pieces of their broken heart. Character, character, character. If you don't know where to begin, I would like to inspire you to look for a point of view. Find someone who you would like to meet. Someone in a different world, in a different time and a different place. And through the process of writing, learn to understand them. And I hope that this is helpful. I really hope that I am giving you a point of view. Because what has helped me in the past is to look at stories not as a series of events on a timeline, because I feel like that's what outlining forces you to look at your story that way. And I'm not saying you shouldn't outline, but what I'm saying is that you shouldn't look at it as though points, as though scenes on the DVD of a movie, levels in a video game, but instead phrase it through the eyes of a character and the slice of their life that we witness through the story. Okay? If you don't know where to begin, begin with character. The fantasy world, the science fiction federations, the apocalypse, the dystopia, the supernatural worlds, they are the stage for the story. But you do not go see a play for the stage. You're there for the characters in that place and the things they do. Okay? Begin first with character. I really hope that helps. I know that I've gone long, and I'm sorry. Let's take a second and tackle the second question of today. It follows up from this, honestly. I received a question about being a newish writer and feeling like you're stuck in limbo, as though you are stuck in between stories or just starting stories and never finishing them. And as a nice prelude to the conversation, I want to let you know that everyone does that. I'm not trying to discredit you. I'm not trying to invalidate your feelings. Everyone does that. Everyone starts stories and sometimes just drops them. I am transcribing a novel that I wrote 80 to 90% of. But I'm back. I'm pushing through again. Sometimes life gets in the way. Sometimes things don't work out. And sometimes, when you think that story is dead, you come back to it and you realize, wow, I actually kind of wrote some words here are actually pretty good. So don't think that you are immediately, and I'm going to say the bad thing. You're not a failure because you dropped the story. Everyone does that. Everyone does that. Everyone does that. I feel like I have to say it again. Everyone does that. Seriously. Every single writer that you like, every single writer who has inspired you, I can assure you that they have dropped stories and they have gone back and revived stories that they dropped. This is part of the process. Sometimes life gets in the way. But now, what about those who want to get started? Who want to commit to a story? Who want to push through? And I feel this might just be me latching onto one element of the problem, but I feel that, at least for me, the thing that seems like the simplest, smallest thing, but it's in reality the very tip of the iceberg, is the battle against the blank page. Because I found that even now, the hardest moment is just right before I start. And I can imagine that for someone who's new at this, or someone who's been struggling with this, to sit before the blank page, to open up your notebook, or to bring up a fresh document, and to put your fingers on the keyboard, and to look at the endless white page. That struggle is real. That struggle is one that I deal with too. But there's things that I've done over time to help me. And some of these are gonna make you roll your eyes. But I would like to inspire you to try them. If anything, because they worked for me. I find that the hardest point of a story is pretty much the beginning. Before you build the momentum. Before you have been doing it for so long that to stop and drop the story seems like the worst idea in the universe. That's why I've been recommending forever to just start. I said last week that if you're waiting for NaNoWriMo but you already have ideas and you're excited, you should just start writing. Why? Because the sooner that you start building momentum, the sooner that you will have that momentum and that nothing will be able to stop you. So today, in the second question, I want to tackle that very exact issue. How do you start? How do you just start? And, in the process of thinking about my thoughts for this episode, because I know that I love to ramble, but I like to at least show up with some idea of what I want to say. I was looking through my own processes, the ways in which that I have prepared myself for this endeavor. The act of writing. I've been through this many times, and it's still hard sometimes. But I've been through this song and dance routine for enough times that I realize a lot of the doubt, a lot of the fear is internal. It's in me. It's not that the page is my enemy. That page is just the page. That document is just the document. It's a receptacle for my thoughts and my ideas. This isn't a battle against some evil. This isn't a battle against fate to define and to battle and to stand against destiny itself and prove that I am worthy of being a writer. This isn't that dramatic. It is merely the time to sit down and capture thoughts on paper. And the thing that has helped me, and I know someone's gonna roll their eyes, is a little thing called visualization. And I know, someone's rolling their eyes, but it helps for sports. It helps for pretty much every part of life. Imagine yourself writing. Imagine yourself sitting down to write. Imagine yourself being halfway through the novel. Imagine yourself finishing the novel. Imagine yourself finally coming up with the first print of your book. Imagine yourself looking at a poster with the cover of your book on it. Imagine yourself doing talks about your book. Imagine yourself going to conventions. Imagine yourself doing signings. Imagine yourself writing. Imagine yourself doing the thing. Imagine yourself at that desk, on that chair, pen in hand, fingers on the keyboard. Imagine yourself doing it. Reinforce it in your mind. Listen to music. Listen to music that inspires you. Imagine yourself writing. Imagine yourself living the life you want to live. Imagine yourself being the person you want to be. Imagine that person being here. Imagine that version of yourself being very close and very near. Because that person is here and is near. And all you need to do is to do that thing you've imagined, to recreate it in real life, to start writing word by word and fill that page, fill that receptacle, that cup with thoughts and imagination. We imagine ourselves doing things because it reinforces the reality that we can do things, and that we will be rewarded for doing things, and that good things will come from us doing this. And that writing leads to chapters, and chapters lead to novels, and novels lead to where you want to be. Imagine yourself writing. Imagine yourself doing the scary thing. And then do it. Imagine yourself doing the thing you want to do. It's called visualization. It works by giving you positive reinforcement, by telling you that writing is scary, but you can do it. You have seen yourself do it in your imagination. You have seen yourself succeed. And that path that you have carved through the endless possibilities of what could be is a path you can follow. If you write and you write, you will finish the novel. It's not a what if. It's a thing that will happen because you will keep on writing and you will finish the novel. It reinforces positively that you can do this. And it's not magic. It's not some sort of arcane magnetism that pulls the universe towards you because you think that it does. It's positive reinforcement through acknowledging that the challenge is here, but you can overcome it. It's the exact same thing we do to make ourselves fearful of things that are not so big, and to fill ourselves with anxiety and worry. But instead of negatively reinforcing behaviors, we are reinforcing positive ones. When you're worried about something and you find yourself going in circles in your head and imagining what could happen from those bad things and imagining the consequences of those bad things, and next thing you know, you've spent hours upon hours imagining something that hasn't happened yet, but you're terrified and fearful. That is negative reinforcement. It is the same thing that we sometimes do when we are at our lowest, but instead, we use it for good. We reinforce to ourselves that this struggle is real, but you can overcome it, because all you need to do is to write word by word. Imagine yourself writing. Imagine yourself drawing. Imagine yourself coding. What it is you wish to do, you can do it. You just have to imagine yourself doing it. Imagine the consequences of you doing it. And to build on that path that you have carved. Because it's not imagination. It's not just wishful thinking. It's reinforcing that this challenge that you're facing is one you can overcome. Okay? I hope I didn't get too real there. Oh man. I've lived that thing. My advice really applies to every walk of life. But it's part of the theory. Was that really the word that came to mind? It's part of the way that I live my life. And it's part of the way... And it's the thing that I don't realize it until I externalize it. I don't realize just how deeply ingrained these mechanisms are until I start picking them apart, until I open up the wristwatch and I realize all the little gears and mechanisms. And I don't want to I'm not saying that these are right. I'm not saying that these are the best mechanism, because I'm still learning myself and I still fall. And sometimes someone else helps me pick myself up. But ultimately, I'm offering you my point of view and what has helped me. And when it comes to writing, visualizing has helped. Because if anything, I imagine myself doing that thing, and it suddenly doesn't seem that far away. It suddenly doesn't seem that distant, that strange, that arcane. It isn't magic. Writing a book isn't magic, though it kind of feels like it. Okay? I hope this was helpful. I've gone on for way too long, but I hope that this helps. And now, for something completely different, let's move over to the final segment of the show, the prompt. A creative exercise to help us think about stories. Because thinking about stories makes them closer to us. It makes them feel more real. Hint, hint, hint. Today, we're going to be deconstructing things. Breaking them down. I didn't realize the parallels to what I just was literally talking about. We're gonna grab the wristwatch and we're going to disassemble it at our own pace. This is going to be a weird one because I'm going to be deconstructing something that I recently played and what I really liked about it and what inspired me to, or what inspired the writing part of me while playing it. But I want you to, while you're at home, follow along. If you end up doing a write-up or if this inspires you to do anything, let me know. As always, I would be delighted to find out what you made from this. And whatever you do, it's yours. You know, you've been here before, you know what I'm talking about. And if you have ideas for a prompt, just shout at me. You know the dealio. Let's move over to the exciting stuff, though. Deconstructing things. As I mentioned previously, when I was very young, thinking about stories, I would often look at what someone else was doing and ask how I could do them differently, or how I could twist those things. And I looked at these stories as kind of formulas, as kind of presets, and I didn't do much thinking beyond that. Over time, of course, I have learned to analyze the stuff around me, to look at it, look at the good, look at the bad, look at what inspires me and at what doesn't inspire me at all. And I like this because I find this to be a very effective way to find stories. I've talked about this before. I talked about this back on my original, guide to how to plan a novel. But today we're going to do a deep dive on deconstructing excitement. Looking at the things we enjoy, the things that inspire us to tell stories, and to break them down. To search for what really, really, really made us want to tell stories. Not just write a story because we watched a movie that was like this, so we're gonna tell a story that is kinda like the movie. Not that, but really look at fiction. To look at all these different forms of media. TV shows, movies, books, games, etc. And to consider the parts of them that inspired us the most. And find those little motes of inspiration. So that we can tell our own stories. The same way that once upon a time, curious people would have disassembled devices and tools and mechanisms to see how they worked. We too can look at stories and disassemble them, take them apart. Not in an attempt to find how the stories worked, but here to seek to define what inspired us. It's not to say, oh, this here are the parts of the story that make everything work. That's silly. The goal here is to deconstruct the excitement that we felt and the inspiration that we found. Because I assume that sometimes you watch movies or read books and you come out of them and you think to yourself, wow, I really want to write a story like this. Wow, I really want to tell a story in a world kinda like this one. And of course, the pitfall of immediately jumping to create something like that is that you can end up with a story that feels insincere. It feels insincere because elements in that story and in that world are there not because they make sense to your story, but because they were elements in the thing that inspired you to begin with. It feels insincere, as though you didn't really stop to consider why those things were there. We will talk more about that. We will talk about dragons in a moment, but first, I'll begin the deconstruction before your very eyes. As you heard in the first segment, I recently played a game. This game is a visual novel, a story with a lot of dialogue and character interactions set within the presentation of a bartender. In this game, you play as a 27-year-old young woman named Jill, who happens to be a bartender at this bar in the futuristic city known as Glitch City. There are androids, who are, of course, robots made to look like humans. There are talking dogs, there are hackers and mercenaries, and all manner of strange people show up at the bar. Some of them are regulars, some of them show up once and never again. When I was first interested in the game, I picked it up a long time ago because I saw that it was a futuristic cyberpunk setting. It takes place in a world ruled by corporations in a dark future that you never get to see during the daytime. One of my favorite things. It deals with the abuse of information, the abuse in the power of corporations, and of course, the nature of artificial intelligence, robotics, and what it means to be human. These were parts of the reasons why I jumped in. But after playing it, I realized that my favorite part of it, as I am breaking it apart, the setting was interesting. It was. I love futuristic settings. But as I am taking apart the pieces, Glitch City, the struggle between corporations and the people clearly being at the bottom of the social scale, the struggle between what is very much clearly police brutality in the form of the White Knights and regular people just trying to live their lives. I'm physically moving pieces, imaginary pieces out of this watch. There is, of course, transhumanism in the form of the cat bloomers. There's, the idea of, talking dogs and what that means. Technology, humans. That's interesting, but I'm taking off pieces. I don't need these, I don't need these, I don't need that. The idea of the bar was fun, but it wasn't fun because it was a bar. What I loved the most about it as I am deconstructing it, I loved a gathering place where people could just come and talk. And even the characters themselves, as I am imaginarily breaking them apart, opening the compartments, pulling out the gears and the little pieces, the little screws, the little parts that makes them who they are. As I am draining the color from the image, as I am removing layer by layer, After Effects and the user interface. The most exciting part for me, it wasn't even my favorite character. It wasn't even the humor that would surprise you. No. It wasn't even the main character, who ended up being way more effective than I thought. As I am moving through the pieces, I see this tiny little mote. This tiny little thing. And I didn't stop to think about this, but now I'm having this kind of realization. My favorite part, the thing that inspired me the most from this story, even though the setting is cool, even though all these science fiction elements are really interesting, even though I really love the struggle between androids and humans, and I know that's funny, I know a subset of you are laughing right now. That's all fun, but I'm literally grabbing all those pieces and shoving them to one side of the table. Those are cool. They're not inspiring me the same way that this one tiny little piece is. And it's a piece not at the center of the story, but it's a piece where I can see how it connects to gears, and those gears connect to moving parts of it, and a whole segment of the mechanism is grounded on characters opening up. As I was experiencing the story, I thought, man, it would be fun to tell stories in a bar. But then I realized that sentiment was the very, very young Max sentiment. Well, this is a story about a bar, so I should write a story about a bar because a story about a bar would be fun. And then I cut myself, and I realized, no, that can't be it. It can't just be that, right? Deconstruct it. Break it down. What is it that really excites you? What is it that was fun? What is it that even now gives me tingles all over my face? And it makes me wish that I had the time right now to write a story about it. It's people opening up. And I wonder if the developers realize that. Because there's a whole mechanic about making the drinks really strong so that your patrons get tipsy and open up even more. Talk about the things that really bother them. Talk about what they're really feeling. Every single moment in the story where I really connected with the characters were the moments in which they opened up. In which you could almost hear the click of the lock as the door is unlocked. And it opens, and you see them, their chests open wide, revealing the pieces of who they are. There are flaws in their mechanisms. The broken pieces that they miss, that they long for. And I know that I'm making it sound very grand. The story itself is pretty relaxed. And it sometimes leans on obscene humor, and that's fine. It's not something that I particularly mind. But it was the sentiment. This feeling of characters opening up. And even now, as I'm realizing it, a lot of the things are coming together. Because the setting is cool. The characters are really fun. There's a character that I really, really, really enjoyed. But at the center of it all, as I was digging through this wristwatch, as I pushed away all the mechanical pieces, the frames, the little screws, the little gears, pieces of brass and silver and copper. And there it is. A tiny little piece. People opening up. People having a reason, a safe space to open up. People having a chance to remove the masks we wear and show us their true faces. Whether they are horrible or beautiful, or something that we can't simply describe in a word and an adjective. That right there. That was what I found the most fun. That right there is what I would like to someday tell a story about. People opening up. It probably will not take place in a bar. It probably won't take place in a cyberpunk setting. It will most certainly not involve talking dogs. And it might not have any alcohol in it. But I feel it in my gut. As I review the thoughts, the pieces on the table. I want to write a story about characters, about people opening up. And so, welcome back to the 19th episode of Omakase. I'm your host, M. Kieran. What kind of story do you want to write? I want to inspire you to critically analyze the stuff that inspires you. Not because it's a good exercise for analyzing stories and for creating stuff that is truly unique to you, but also because it's a great way to discover things. It's a great way to emerge out of a movie theater or after closing a book and think to yourself, this little thing is gonna come back to me. I will someday write a story with this little element. Little things like that are good enough to propel you through a whole story. I mentioned this earlier, and I know that I'm going long and I'm sorry. I mentioned this earlier. What's my deal with dragons? It's not that I dislike dragons. The issue that I have is that in a lot of fantasy stories, dragons get dropped in there, not because dragons belong to the world in which that book takes place, but rather because dragons are and I'm holding quotation fingers, part of fantasy stories. And as your editor, as the really, really mean editor that I have to be, I will look at your story and ask, why are there dragons here? And if your answer is, well, because dragons have to be in a fantasy story, I'm going to wiggle my finger, close your manuscript, and ask you to create a reason for them to be there. So that they feel authentic. So that they don't feel like another checkmark in a long list of things your story needs to have. If you're writing a fantasy story, what really needs to be there? And why? Truly analyze fiction. Question why things are there. Think critically. And you will find stories that will wow people. Stories that will open their eyes. And that will inspire them. Okay? I'm not saying dragons are bad. I'm just saying that any kind of element that you think to yourself, well, I'm writing a science fiction story, so there must be sexy blue alien ladies. And a part of me is like, no. I close your manuscript and I'm like, no, please send it back. Tell the chef to make it again. That's mean. But you know what I'm saying. There's gotta be sexy blue ladies. It's just the way that science fiction is, Max. Max, you don't get it. 1 star. Where are the sexy blue ladies in this science fiction story? All this bitterness comes from... Oh my god. Okay. I know that I'm gone really long. You know what? The podcast is now over. Thank you for tagging along. You're lovely people. I hope you have a lovely time between now and the next time we meet. NaNoWriMo will begin. I hope that those of you charging into that month have a wonderful time. Charge in. Start. Okay? You got this. It's gonna be hard. It is. But it's not something you cannot achieve. Okay? Okay. And now that the podcast is over, I can actually get this off my chest. The moment in which I started hating dragons, in fantasy, was, there was, oh my god, this is the nerdiest thing, okay? If you think I'm cool, stop listening now. My favorite video game growing up was a role-playing game for the Super Nintendo, and later on PlayStation 1, named Chrono Trigger. It was an interesting fantasy setting, and it involved time travel, and it did a lot of things that I really liked. When the sequel came out, or the follow-up game to that, titled Chrono Cross, one of the things that I found kind of uninspired about it, and I just really didn't enjoy, was how the plot of that story was now centered around dragons. Dragons who, I don't recall if there were even dragons in the original game. There might be. There were dinosaurs in the first game. But the whole idea that, like, in this world that is really similar to the last one, where other things were at the center of the story, now suddenly, the core of the plot, the core of the things that matter is dragons. And a part of me, even when I was young, I was like, why dragons? Why not, I don't know, something cool? Something that I hadn't seen before. Something that would have wowed me. Something that wasn't a fantasy. I don't want to say trope because, I mean, it doesn't feel genuine to say trope. But I was just like, dragons? Really? You want me to go and defeat every single elemental dragon? That's what we're doing next. This is the next beat in the story. Like, every time I stumble and stuff like that, to me it always feels uninspired, unsincere. It feels as though someone is standing with a clipboard going, okay, I know that we are making this thing, so let me just grab out my checklist, okay? Okay, we got goblins? Good. We got dwarves? Good. Yo, where are my dragons at? We gotta have a dragon for this fantasy setting. Otherwise, it would be way too radical. Let's put some dragons in there. Alright. I'm being way too bitter. About a game that came out 20 years ago. Oh my god, I'm so old. Oh god. I'm gonna take a sip of my drink. It's tea. Delicious. Non-alcoholic beverage, because, okay, this end of the video club is a mess, but I assume you're here for that. I assume that if you have tagged along for an hour and Lord knows how long, I assume that if you have tagged along up until this point, that you're down for whatever silliness is about to happen. Before anyone even tries to make the joke about Max possibly drinking alcohol because Max, or drinking alcohol live on the show, because I was playing a game about a bartender, I will have you know that alcohol will dry out your throat, which is bad when you're recording an audio-only podcast. I am drinking my favorite herbal tea that is good for your throat, and it has a really dumb name. The company that makes it is Traditional Medicinals, and this is Throat Coat. It has a dumb name. I am not about to argue that Throat Coat isn't a terrible name, but I really like it. It feels very soothing to the throat, and it's great when I'm, talking I'm just talking with myself. I'm just here talking with myself for, an hour and a half. So now, alright, I'm getting way too self-conscious about ranting about Chrono Cross. Oh my god, what a random thing to bring up, Max. Still mad about Chrono Cross. Alright, let's get out of here. As always, in the end of the video club, I always like to give a shout out to every single one of my lovely, lovely patrons. Don't mind me buying time while the screen loads up. And now, I am going to shout out every single person pledging $1 or more to my Patreon over at patreon.com/amkaren. A. Howard, Atalak, Alistair Baywood, Elisa Dudley, Amanda Stevens, Amelia, Amy Palmer. Are you kidding me? Alright, well, I want to give a shout out to Angela and the other Angela. How is it? Oh no, there's two Angelas now. I mean, I know which one is the original Angela. I cannot in good faith call you the OG Angela. Ojangela. Ojangela is also the name of the next Pokemon to be leaked for Okay, listen, I don't even know what Pokemon gen we're on right now. Oh no, I don't know which one is the real one. Actually, you're both real Angelas. Just one. Wow, the new Angela pledged like literally 5 days ago. Well, welcome aboard. Thank you for tagging along. I hope you have a lovely time. Ani Exohoshi, biting the sun. Blarg. Today we're all business over here at the shoutouts. Blarg. Please make sure to wear a suit and tie. We're not telling you where to wear them though, so you can just have them on your head. I think that's fine for dress code. Brenda C.E. Richards. See, dress code, that's why I don't make games, because I can't even follow the dress code. How am I supposed to code a game when I can't even follow the dress code? C.E. Richards, Caitlin, and the other Caitlin, Carrie-Ann Eccleston, Kathy Lindsay, Lishadra, Christiane, Christine Dennis, Kristen Lofton, Clem Pastor, Dwayne Jackson, Eleanor, Arisos. Oh no, no one's yelled at me. Joffrey Raby. Joffrey. Oh yeah, I bet Joffrey's tired of hearing that joke. Joffrey Raby. Gilbert Gadro. Hero Song. Irina Phoenix. Janosch Hebatsky. Man, remember when I pronounced that name wrong? I try not to. J. Tana Kirkwood. Jeffrey James Williams. Juan Nunes. K.M. Anderson. Kamishore Rao Shaluri. Kaylee. Kiel. Kit Lee. Lacey. Lear Killo. M.T. Locatelli. Mark Maruska. Mary Foster Smith. Nicola Grissom. Nicolay. I really should enunciate parts of your name that are not actually broken by a hyphen or anything. Nicolay. Noam Sahar. Novels and Tomes. Pablo. Pat Eichson. Polly Craftwell. Raquel Fernandez. Oh no. Wait a minute. Ryanan August, you pledged to me even though I know now that I disappointed you. Because I think you're the same person from Twitter. I think you're the same Ryan and August from Twitter. I hope you are, because I'm about to reference something you may not even know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry that I disappoint you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that Kitty and I learned to appreciate Bakugo after 62 episodes of My Hero Academia. Ryanan. Okay, now. You know what? Screw it. No one's listening. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna grab my keyboard. How to pronounce Ryanan? Okay, it's taking me to a YouTube video. Let me see. Let me see. Does this work? No, that doesn't work. How to pronounce Ryanan? Rhiannon. Ray? Oh my god. I hate Americans. Wait a minute. Someone is like, how do you pronounce it in British English? And I'm like, wait a minute. Is this not an American? Oh my god. Is this? Oh no. Rhiannon. Okay. Thank you about that. Also, I just realized that my headphones are not plugged into my computer, so you all heard that. Rhiannon August. Rhiannon. Yeah, I know. That's totally not what I was saying. Rhiannon August. Hey, thank you for tagging along. Roa. Shimmer Tales. Sky D White. Soul Muse. Don't mind me just scratching my nose live on screen. Sylvia Leitilla. Synexia, and Wendy Christopher. Wasn't that fun, everybody? And y'all, did I just say y'all? That's not part of my character. I hope you all had fun. And I hope that if anything, I gave you another point of view. I really hope that the advice for new writers helps. And I hope that if anything, I entertained you for a little while. Now, a part of me really wanted to just spend this last segment just continuing to talk about Valhalla and how much I enjoyed it. But you know what? Maybe another day. Thank you for tagging along. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me. Imagine yourself doing the hard thing. Imagine yourself being brave. And then jumping in. Okay? Okay.